Welcome to Professional Risk Managers International Association, that's Premium webinar. Today our topic is Anti-Money Laundering, Combating the Financing of Terrorism and Financial Action Task Force Restrictions on Pakistan. The webinar will focus on risks for the economy, including anti-money laundering, CFT, Fatf, etc. We have a very distinguished panel to discuss on the topic today. We have Dr. Ikramul. He's he's a lawyer, he's an expert on money laundering in Pakistan, a very well-known name. He writes in numerous newspapers on the topic. Then we have Azizur Rahman, he's a former executive director of Pakistan Credit Rating Agency. Then we have Sana Khan, she's an expert on money laundering based out of Dublin. And myself, Fahad Zafar. I'll just be giving you some introduction on money laundering, uh, what money laundering is, how money laundering is happening in Pakistan, what the central bank is doing, what's the prime minister or the government's focus, what central bank's focus is, and then we'll hand over to our other panelists to make some presentations on the topic. So let's just start. Money laundering. Money laundering has been addressed in the United Nations Vienna Convention, 1988. The conversion or transfer of property as such property is derived from an offense for purpose of concealing or disguising the illicit origin of property or assisting any person who is involved in such offense to evade the legal consequence of his actions. So, United Nations is addressing money laundering. The next slide is money laundering. So we have, as per some estimates, 2 to 5% of global GDP, annual GDP, is about 800 billion to 200 trillion US dollars is money laundered. It's a huge amount. Do you guys know what Pakistan's GDP is? So next slide is money laundering. In my personal opinion, as Chief Risk Officer, Risk Manager at commercial banks, I've closely observed how fraudsters manage to open bank accounts with names similar to established NGOs, charities in Europe and North America. This allows launderers an easy sailing towards whitening of their black money. So next slide is over 2 trillion was moved between 1999 and 2017 in suspicious transactions by the global banks, as per ICIJ. Yeah, the Panama fame ICIJ, International Consortium of Investigative Journals. 6 Pakistani banks were named in investigation on the role global banks play in money laundering. 29 suspicious transactions, close to $2.5 million. 6 banks are the most well-known in Pakistan: Allied Bank, Al-Falah Bank, Bank Al-Falah, UBL, Standard Chartered, Habib Metropolitan Bank, Habib Bank. So imagine 6 of the biggest banks are named in money laundering. Then money laundering in Pakistan, the most famous money exchange company. Whoever grew up in Pakistan would be knowing about Kanani and Kalia. They had branches all over the big cities: Lahore, Islamabad, Karachi, everywhere. Kanani and Kalia. So Fence and Files claimed that Kanani and Kalia network illegally transferred an estimated $14 billion to $16 billion annually for drug cartels and terrorist organizations. Amazing. Amazing. Then we have a picture of a famous model media personality, Ayanagi. She was caught with almost $500,000 US dollar in cash, allegedly laundering to Dubai. She was caught on Islamabad airport. Then the next slide is fake bank accounts in Pakistan. Joint Investigation Team report on fake accounts by Federal Investigation Agency of Pakistan. Reportedly, ordinary citizens' accounts were being used for money laundering. Millions of rupees were found in rickshawala, samosewala, sabziwala bank accounts, even though some were barely earning minimum wages. Do you expect how much would the rickshawala be making in a day? I'm sure not more than 1,000 rupees saving in a day or revenue in a day. And same is samosewala, sabziwala, and other people. Do you think if they're making 1,000 in a day, they'll be less like 30 days? If they work every day, then it's like 30,000 rupees. And what's the expenditure for every household? More than almost 30,000, not less than 30,000, I'm sure. So how can they stash millions in their bank accounts when they're just making 30,000 and they're making? It's really difficult for them to make their ends meet with this inflation, and so it's very interesting what a report Federal Investigation Agency had published on fake. We'll not be going in the detail on this report, but it's really interesting, and I would suggest everyone to, if they have access, to read through it. Then the next slide is money laundering via Bitcoin. This is a new phenomenon. Bitcoin, crypto. So, as of 18th of January 2021, Sindh Provincial Police arrested a student of Karachi's local university on charges of international terror financing. The student was sending US dollars out of Pakistan via crypto. Focus of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan. He says the biggest reason for depreciation in Pakistani rupee is money laundering. Then on another occasion, he says money was sent abroad through illicit channels because those in power send their money outside, and they will when they send their money outside, they can't stop others, right? Imran Khan claims that 10,000 billion $10 billion US dollar. Pakistanis have stashed 10 billion US dollars outside the country, and he intends to bring them back. He's really focused, determined. Any kind of, on another occasion, Imran Khan says any kind of previous loopholes on money laundering will be closed. We are supporting overseas Pakistanis and our remittances are increasing. Yes, remittances are increasing. That's Imran Khan's focus. He's working on improving the remittances. He's determined. So let's see what, this is really good. That determination on anti-money laundering from the top. Okay, focus of central bank. Since the mid-2019, Central Bank of Pakistan, the State Bank of Pakistan, has started making public the fines imposed. It imposes on commercial banks. Central Bank imposed a cumulative fine worth 1.68 billion rupees on 15 commercial banks for, within the period March 2022, June 2020. It's amazing. Then just a few days back, State Bank of Pakistan imposed monetary penalty of almost 60 million rupees on Habib Metropolitan Bank on account of violation of its AML and CFT guidelines. Imagine, Habib Metropolitan Bank, whose NPLs has always been less than 5%. We all knew Habib Bank as one of the top performing banks. And look, they need to work on their AML and CFT guidelines, Habib Metropolitan. Okay, central bank has also become more vigilant about complying with international standards due to Pakistan being on the grey list of Fatf. Yes, the focus of central bank is on getting Pakistan removed from the grey list. Fatf's blacklist. I'm not going to go on detail because we'll allow our other participants to let us know more on Fatf. So I'm just going to touch on what blacklist. Blacklist is countries are identified as non-cooperative countries or territories are in blacklist. Countries are identified as jurisdictions under increased monitoring are placed in grey list. That's a temporary list. So mostly, countries who are, there'll be countries, either countries are outside the grey list, then they move into grey list or they go into blacklist. Okay, two countries we have in blacklist, and they are North Korea and Iran. So Iran is in the blacklist of Fatf, North Korea is in the blacklist of Fatf. I remember there's a very well-known bank known as Bank Sadarat of Iran. And, you know, they've got branch in Sheikh Zayed Road. I've been there a few years back. They're in Fatf. I don't know. I can't talk much about. Don't have much news about that. But then we have a grey list of Fatf. Grey list has Albania, Mauritius, Cambodia, Zimbabwe, Bahamas, Myanmar, Burma, yeah, Ghana, Syria, Barbados, Nicaragua, Iceland, Uganda, Botswana, Jamaica, already on Panama, Yemen, and Pakistan. Pakistan is in the grey list. Imagine, I can't find Afghanistan in this list, but we have Pakistan. This this is because Afghanistan has really made effort. Afghanistan's central bank has made a lot of effort in working on anti-money laundering regulations in Afghanistan. So now we'll ask other panelists to come in and let us know more about what FATF is and discuss on the topic. First, I will ask Sana to come in and let us know more about the restriction, the clauses which Pakistan is working on, and the clauses which have already been complied. Welcome, Sana. Come in. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, thanks for the introduction. So I'm just going to give everybody an introduction as regards my background. So I'm based in Dublin, Ireland. I'm a barrister by profession. I have numerous qualifications in compliance, AML, and privacy matters, and I provide consultancy, legal, and regulatory advice to a wide variety of organizations falling within the scope of AML and privacy laws. As well as that, I work directly with the global ACAMS, which is the global organization as regards to anti-money laundering. And I provide lecturing and teaching facilities with that organization. So with that kind of background, hopefully gives you some comfort as regards my knowledge in this area. In addition, I travel to Pakistan regularly. I spend a number of weeks, and I'm based myself out in Islamabad. My parents are residing in Islamabad, so we're there on a regular basis. And there's been a huge increase in development in Pakistan, but lately, the grey listing of Fatf and with Imran Khan's government, there has been a little backward development in terms of our economic stability, particularly with the fact that the rupees is constantly falling down. And it's all coming down to the fact that under the international sphere, we are actually seen as a very high-risk jurisdiction for money laundering. Terrorist financing is a big accusations constantly being placed against Pakistan. So I'm going to just start off briefly with a refresher on what is meant by anti-money laundering, just to give individuals a refresher on this. And then we're going to focus on the importance of FATF. Why is this international body so influential, and how is it affecting Pakistan and its reputation, and particularly its economic stability and for its economic future? And then we're going to deal with, as Fahad mentioned, the grey list significance of Pakistan, and see what potential steps there are that Pakistan can take, as well as what recommendations are still outstanding as regards to FATF's grey listing of Pakistan. So when we move on to the first section, which is the introduction to AML, I have a slide that basically summarizes a few acronyms. So if you're working in the area of risk management, if you're working in the area of compliance, what happens is that you will notice that many terms are referred to through acronyms as opposed to saying them out fully. So these are the common ones you'll find in international organizations, and this includes within Pakistan itself, because it all stems from FATF's 40 recommendations. So what is AML? At its very basic level, there are three components of what is meant by anti-money laundering. The first is that you are aware that the property or the asset in question is derivative of an illegal source. So you are therefore then going to convert that illegal source and try and conceal it in order to disguise the true nature, as in disguise that it actually came from an illegal source. And then you can conceal this using multiple financial transactions. So the more complex transactions you have in place, the more entities that you can create, and particularly offshore entities, that will disguise the true source of the illegal funds or assets being obtained. And then finally, the whole aim of the money launderer is that they can acquire the asset back and make it presented in a way that it is derivative of legal source as opposed to an illegal source. So they want to acquire the property back, so it is circular in nature, whereas terrorist financing may have legal origin, but ultimately what the terrorist financer wants is to fund a terrorist activity or fund a terrorist group. So they will never see their money back. What they get in return is to see that terrorist group or activity succeeding or proceeding with a particular task that the terrorist organization is looking to do. As opposed to money laundering, it's all about converting the illegal assets, disguising it using concealment, and then acquiring it for their own personal gain. So it's all going back to the money launderer in the end. You would probably seen that whenever there is a data leak or a whistleblower leak in the Western world as regards to AML, you will notice that oftentimes you'll have senior Pakistani political figures there, whether present or past, and you also will have mentioning of various Pakistani banks. Most recently, we've seen in the FinCEN, which is the US regulator, as regards to receiving suspicious transaction reports, there was a number of Pakistani banks mentioned again. So all of this is continually giving us a negative scope as regards to how serious we as Pakistanis take as regards to money laundering and terrorist financing. And it doesn't help us when we're trying to build international relationship and develop our economy and country. And Pakistan is a fast developing country, and I see that myself. The future for the new generation is actually of a concern, particularly with the fact that there isn't a lot of resources, jobs, or employment opportunities available within the country itself. It shows further why our interdependence on international community, business, foreign direct investment is key for those for the future of those Pakistanis. And not every Pakistani can go abroad, create employment for themselves and bring back money, because much of Pakistan's economy that is seen to be in some shape or form of stability is derivative of overseas Pakistanis or family members having some connections with overseas as opposed to directly from Pakistan, because unfortunately we are a rapidly growing young country, and there isn't enough employment within Pakistan itself. So these are going to really affect the long-term success of Pakistan as a country. So we really need to focus on AML, even if it's only for the ulterior motive of benefiting Pakistan's economy overall. And I do agree with one thing that Imran Khan has been saying, is that, yes, the rupees have been significantly falling down simply because of the grey listing by FATF, simply because we haven't done enough to build the trust thrust on the international community as regards to the process of AML and CTF efforts. And okay, COVID has been negative and it's affecting the global economy, but I do believe it is fundamentally going down to how we can attract and keep foreign direct investment. So from all of this, we can know that for money laundering to take place, there is a deliberate knowledge that needs to have taken place. So the individuals in question must have known or should have known. So under EU and the Fatf's 40 recommendations, and these recommendations are the baseline, I should clarify, for international and national anti-money laundering and terrorist financing laws. So for Pakistan to implement laws and regulations, it would follow very much closely with what Fatf has stated in its recommendations. So knowledge has been obtained in the derivative of, if it is an objective factual circumstances, then you should be considered to have known. So in that example that Fahad mentioned regarding the model, the simple, I remember that story very well. The model kept saying she did not know that she was committing money laundering. She did not know what the source of funds were, and she was simply doing a task asked. The reply from a legal perspective should have been, well, would an objective person who is carrying $500,000 in cash, would they have been suspicious as to the true origin? Would they have been suspicious as to what the purpose of the money was to be? Because you can't transfer more than the equivalent of $10,000 in cash, let alone $500,000. So I don't think there was any significant negative repercussions for the model in the end. But again, that shows that, yes, we go to court, we do investigations, but there really isn't real repercussions for those in prominent positions, whether it's in the media or political business individuals. But again, that just shows the negative enforcement actions taken within Pakistan itself, and how we are blatantly, okay with, such defense where, under the eyes of international community, knowledge should have been derived from objective factual circumstances. Would the reasonable person believed that there was something suspicious about the activity? If so, then it is considered money laundering. So as this diagram shows, it's basically the 3 stages, and they're the placement, layering, and integration. So you collect the dirty money, whether it's through tax evasion, whether it's through drug trafficking, whether it's to human trafficking or any other illegal source, and then you place this into the banking or financial sector, and this dirty money is then transferred around Pakistan and abroad, particularly if you are wealthy and have business connections. You're going to be utilizing a lot of overseas entities to particularly disguise the true source in order to not identify who is ultimately behind these corporate vehicles. And finally, it's integrated back into the community to the purchase of, for example, luxury assets, financial investments, in order to make them look like as if they are legitimate. So think about the case of Nawaz Sharif and his family. He was using offshore countries. He was using entities and multiple corporate entities to truly disguise the source of where the money was and who was ultimately behind these corporate vehicles. And in order to avoid tax and bring back money and utilize it for his own family's needs. And now I know we're focusing on Nawaz Sharif in my example, but there are clearly many different other politicians, wealthy individuals in Pakistan are doing the same, but because of the data leak in terms of the Panama Papers, it really revealed Sharif and a number of other Pakistani officials. But there are others there, and it's only about a matter of time where we see more data leaks coming into the forefront. And even just recently in 2020, a lot of the Pakistani banks were actually hacked, and there was a cyber data breach. So there's a lot of data that has been actually extracted. And what these cybersecurity criminals do is they don't actually release the information instantly. They try and blackmail, manipulate individuals and the organizations that they have stolen their data. So the repercussions of that data leak could come to the forefront in, for example, this year or the near future. because they keep a slow and steady approach to, utilizing the data. And when the time is right, that's when these cybersecurity criminals really start trying to evoke some benefit for themselves. So FATF, as Fahad mentioned, is the international body. It's an intergovernmental, which basically means that there are composition of governmental representatives in this organization. It's a multinational group, and it's founded in 1989. So really, the world of AML and CTF has been growing since FATF was established in 1989. So it isn't as old or historic as one would have thought initially, but its influence within the global market has grown rapidly within a short space of time. So essentially the aim of the FATF is to provide AML guidance, and AML guidance includes CTF, which is counter-terrorist financing, to governmental bodies around the world. FATF sets the standards in order to promote effective implementation of legal and regulatory and operational measures. So this is where its 40 recommendations have come into effect. So these 40 recommendations are setting the standard as to what is considered to be a suitable legal, regulatory and operational framework when it comes to AML and CTF matters. It also is a policy-making body, and it does this by trying to generate necessary political will and pressure in order to push member states to reform their legal and regulatory environment as regards to AML and CTF. But what FATF does not do, it does not enact laws and regulations. So it isn't a legal body, it isn't a legislative body, and it does not impose penalties and fines. This is significant because oftentimes people think it's FATF's pushing that has caused Pakistan to, get penalized by the international community. But what FATF actually does is it does it through bad press or negative publication, just like putting Pakistan on the grey list, because it automatically places warning sign. So the 40 recommendations have evolved since its first introduction in 1996. And as time goes by, a lot of loopholes as regards to AML and CTF measures came to the forefront. So naturally, laws are going to be updated, recommendations are going to be updated. So we have the most recent version in 2012, which actually further included tax evasion as a money laundering offence and expanded various different scopes, including what is considered to be a politically exposed person. And that means in the present AML and CTF markets, it includes domestic and foreign PEPs. So FATF also has regional style bodies. So these are mini bodies that essentially follow what FATF is doing and incorporate FATF's recommendations, FATF standards, typologies, all within their own independent body. But what they focus on is they're focusing on the regional side of things. So we have around 8 FATF-style bodies, and that includes having the Caribbean FATF-style regional body. We have the Asia-Pacific group, which Pakistan is a member of. And these bodies or groups are specific to different locations around the world in order to focus the AML and CTF regime and review within their own jurisdiction or locality. So for what it is considered to be a vulnerability, say in the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, is drug trafficking. So many of the recommendations issued by FATF Caribbean regional body is simply focusing on how to improve the enforcement actions on drug trafficking. When it comes to the Middle East or FATF-style regional body, you will see that they focus on a lot on counter-terrorism and AML matters, particularly in the non-traditional financial sector. And the same applies to the Asia-Pacific group. So these groups are designed to focus on what a particular group of countries' risk is in terms of AML and CTF, and they utilize this by combining it with FATF's 40 recommendations. So The Asia Pacific Group is the intergovernmental body that Pakistan is a part of. So Pakistan isn't directly a member of FATF, but through its membership with Asia Pacific Group, it has basically attested to the fact that it will be signing up to FATF's 40 recommendations. And as part of the FATF-style regional body, APG, they have the ability to carry out mutual evaluation reports as regards to Pakistan's implementation of FATF's 40 recommendations, guidelines, and typologies. And so it's actually APG, which is reviewing and meeting Pakistan on a regular basis to see the progress as regards to its AML and CTF efforts. And APG, remember, reports back and implements all its recommendation guidelines in line with what FATF is saying, which is essentially, if you were to, for want of a better description, the parent entity in this case, or parent intergovernmental body here. And Pakistan has been placed on the grey list by FATF for its lack of effective AML and CTF controls. Moving on to FATF grey list and what this actually means, we can see that FATF has two types of lists. And if you recall, I mentioned that FATF doesn't impose penalties or fines, but what it does do, it does promote negative publicity. It kind of gives you a good list and a bad list. So if you're on the blacklist, you're basically shunned from the international community because you're seen to be a non-cooperative country. Fahad highlighted in his slide earlier on that there's only two countries currently on the blacklist, and that's Iran and North Korea. And whether you're in the AML compliance or just general aware of the political environment, those two countries are really seen as not developed. They have a lot of problems domestically and also internationally in trying to get any source of assistance. So blacklist really is essentially saying you are not good at all as regards to your efforts on AML and CTF, and therefore nobody should do any business with you. And that makes it very difficult to gain foreign products and services, and it makes it also difficult for the country itself to be selling products and services and to improve their economy. So those two countries, we do not want to see Pakistan on this list, because that would be, I think, entirely devastating for the stability and economic future of Pakistan. So the grey list is where we have found ourselves in, and this is basically a list that has been identified as jurisdictions requiring increased monitoring. So these are countries that have made efforts to combat money laundering and terrorist financing, but these efforts aren't sufficient enough to be in line with FATF and the APG's recommendations as regards to AML and CTF. There are clear deficiencies within Pakistan's AML and CTF efforts, and FATF revises its grey list on a regular basis, adding, removing, and deleting countries. Most recently, Iceland has been removed from the grey list. So right now there are 18 countries on the grey list. And if you can see in the list that I've provided and what Fahad provided, the list includes Syria, Panama, Zimbabwe, Yemen, and Pakistan. So as a reputation perspective, if you're putting in Pakistan in the same line with Syria, which has its own huge struggles on numerous levels, particularly with ISIS, and then you have Zimbabwe, which have its economy is destroyed essentially, and it will remain in that position for the foreseeable future. And the same applies to Yemen. Panama is an offshore jurisdiction and has been particularly negative, particularly in light of the fact that it assists a lot of companies and wealthy individuals evade tax through corporate and complex structures being created. Hence the Panama paper leak, which Nawaz Sharif had a direct implication for Pakistan and his family. So it's a negative repercussion. As soon as you mention AML and Pakistan, you picture yourselves with Syria, Zimbabwe, and Yemen. As a reputation, these are not countries you want to be associated with, because you are basically saying that we are as for want of a better description, undeveloped as those countries, and we have severe core problems in a social, economic, and political sector. And yes, Pakistan does have this, but I don't think it is to the same extent as Syria or Yemen, for example, or even Zimbabwe, which has a dictatorship in place. So the consequences of being placed on the grey list are hugely significant. We are facing economic sanctions from International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank. It also explains why prices have been increasing within Imran Khan's government at this particular moment and in the previous few years, because he is facing pressure on to make these changes. He's also being faced the pressure to pay back the high interest rates, because these international bodies that Pakistan have taken loans are not looking at Pakistan favorably. So they are putting more pressure on Pakistan to return high interest loans, and they're not being sympathetic. It also makes it difficult to get further leeway in terms of extensions on these loans, and that explains further why prices and the economy in Pakistan and the Pakistani rupees are constantly falling. There's vast reduction in volumes of international trade. It's very clear since the Imran Khan government has come into effect that international trade for Pakistan has suffered. But again, it can't just be pointed at Imran Khan and his political representations. There's a lot of repercussions coming from the fact that we are on the grey list, and also because of COVID-19. We're also seeing a lot of international boycotts. Many international organizations within the Western world, when I'm giving advice, they do see Pakistan in a negative limelight, and sometimes they think the risk outweighs the commercial benefit, or the risk in reputation outweighs the potential commercial benefit that they may have. So they just avoid doing business, and the business is taken to the places like Bangladesh or India. So it does lead to negative country and business reputation, which ultimately leads to foreign direct investment reduction. And in this day and age, there needs to be foreign direct investment in place for Pakistan's long-term stability and strategy as a country, because we need to be seen to move forward as opposed to be moving backwards. So when a country is placed on the grey list, it really loses access to the global financial system. And we have India, which is constantly trying to place Pakistan on the backlist because India keeps saying that, oh, there is a perceived lack of importance within Pakistan as regards to terrorist financing groups, and as regards to having suitable laws and enforcement actions in place. And look, Pakistan are constantly fighting the terrorist groups in different shapes and formats. Just the nature of its geography has made it more vulnerable to terrorist financing, and it has made proper, in my viewpoint, leeways. But you have countries who are deliberately trying to push Pakistan into the blacklist, because that will make it a very much, a struggle for Pakistan's survival, in essence, because we will have no access to the international community, and again will be placed into the league of Iran and North Korea, which are also sanctioned countries. So if we have also sanctions in place, what will happen from an international financial sanctions perspective, that you will lose potentially any investment business opportunity that Pakistan may have, and it essentially takes Pakistan out of the global international system. So in terms of that, it's a very much a significant implications. It's estimated that around 10 billion US dollars have been lost by Pakistan simply because it has become grey list. So this would be even more significant if it was placed on the blacklist. So as part of the reason why Pakistan is being given so much time, yes, we have COVID-19, but there was a time where Pakistan had not done significant updates as regards to the AML and CTF measures, and Fatf was very critical. But because it was China, and China seemed to be a friendly figure for Pakistan in this political environment, it gave Pakistan more time to deal with these issues. So Fatf has now given a further extension, which took place in February 2020, but then COVID started, and now Fatf has given a further extension and said, Pakistan must finish all its targets, must deal with all the deficiencies identified in the mutual evaluation report of APG in order to meet international standards as regards to AML and CTF. So Germany is now the Fatf chair, so likely we're not going to be given the same sympathy or consideration that China had given us. So we have been on the Fatf grey list for a number of years. We've been given enough time, but truth be told, from an objective and taking away my Pakistani legal hat, there's enough time to introduce basic controls, basic AML and CTF legislations in place. And because we're basically starting off with something that was essentially non-existent, or even if it was existent, it was seen so poor that it may as well have not have been in place. Laws have been enacted. Now it's going to be more tricky in terms of seeing how these laws are going to be enforced, how they're going to be applied, what particular regulatory guidance is the central bank, as in the State Bank of Pakistan, are going to give to organizations that fall within its scope as regards to what steps need to be taken. Simple steps as investing in trained staff, having staff trained specifically on Pakistani AML and CTF measures, even understanding Pakistani culture, because Pakistan has a diverse culture set, which is contrary to many Western belief. There's a lot of diverse cultures in Pakistan, and for you to understand that, you'll be better able to ascertain exactly what types of risks can be derivative of those various different cultures and communities within Pakistan. For example, what is an AML or CTF risk in Islamabad will be clearly different to what is different in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, given the fact that there's a lot more tribal areas, given the fact that there is a lot more potential for illicit trade taking place using the traditional Silk Roads from Afghanistan, and that includes drug trafficking. So if you kind of know who your clientele are, you're better able to create a risk profile. And when you're creating a risk profile, you're able to ascertain as an institution what type of monetary assets are going to come in to that client's account. And in order to do so, it's all coming down to your awareness. And as Pakistanis, I think there are inconsistencies as regards to how we view. We just think we're all on the same page, but no, there are vast differences in communities, dialect, in cultures within Pakistan itself. Yes, it's good to get a national approach, but when it goes down to better understanding your client risk as a financial institution, you need to understand and have these cultural awareness training as well as your AML and CTF training. Only then will you be able to better have equipped individuals who can raise the alarm when they find something suspicious, which will then be investigated in order to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. And now Pakistan have been finally warned, as I mentioned, that if it doesn't increase, it will be placed on the blacklist. And as I said, that would be, I think, perhaps the most devastating implication for Pakistan in its short but modern history. And it will be a long time before we gain any reputation. As a foreign Pakistani barrister, everybody presumes that I'm, for example, Indian because my surname Khan. Because it brings with it a negative connotation when I say in Pakistan, you can see instantly they say, oh, Pakistani. There is nothing wrong with being Pakistani, but the international community have come to view it as a corrupt, unstable country that assists and harbors terrorists. The same can be said with India, but India have worked very hard for the international stance, trying to gain the foreign direct investment. So you have international community investing in it. So they naturally are going to be more amenable to Indian recommendations. There's terrorist activities taking place in India. There's corruption, bribery, to the same extent, perhaps if not more. But because of its focus on international reputation, I like to say it's like a social media profile of individual. People portray the best aspects, but behind it, there's, the cobwebs. They're all the same problems that most people and most countries face. Pakistan needs that. Yes, Imran Khan is doing great in trying to work with that, but you can't do it unless you get the basics right. And when I say basics, it's also about AML and CTF, because if you're placed on the grey list, you're just seen to be a country with a high risk that have severe deficiencies. So how are you going to gain the international trust of individuals? How are we going to be able to say, well, actually, we are not on the grey list. We've progressed and developed rapidly and have invested heavily in our AML and CTF measures. Here are clear examples, as Fahad mentioned, of recent enforcement actions in place. So we are taking it serious, and that should give assurances to the international community. And it also will assist international and overseas Pakistanis as well from a reputational standpoint. So what are the next steps as regards to Fatf and Pakistan? So look, Pakistan since 2018 have really made significant changes in its AML and CTF measures in order to combat the deficiencies. And because it was starting off at a very low level, these changes were quickly, bringing out positive viewpoints from Fatf as regards to our AML efforts. But again, as I mentioned, it's going to go to a stage that once we introduce AML checks and balances within our legal and regulatory environment, it comes down to how well do we apply these AML CTF requirements, and then demonstrate with true statistics and enforcement actions the implication and understanding. And as I say, it's all going to come down to training and awareness of your staff, empowering staff, for example, in the State Bank of Pakistan and other regulatory bodies, to be able to know what is expected of them, what they should expect as regards to AML and CTF measures, so that they can be in the best place to make a decision as regards to suspicious transactions, money laundering, and terrorist financing. So Fatf released a statement during Q4 of 2020, which basically meant that, the last remaining items for Pakistan is to focus on including in its AML legislation and CTF legislation that terrorist financing is taking a broad approach. It also means that it needs to introduce additional lists from a terrorist financing perspective and make sure that there is appropriate implications from an enforcement perspective as regards to terrorist financing and sanctions. It also tries to push for terrorist financing violations, enforcement actions against, a governmental body, and including federal and civil penalties to be in place. And it also extends to having criminal legislation updated in order to take into account that if individuals are deliberately breaching AML and CTF legislation, that there will be criminal repercussions for that. Take example of what happened with Nawaz Sharif. So Pakistan has now, I think, until February 2021 to really complete the last remaining items in order to get off the grey list. And we need to keep off the grey list. Simply, we can't be a reactive country. That is also a major negative repercussions for Pakistan reputation. Just because we get off the grey list doesn't mean, things are going to improve. It's actually going to mean we need to keep off it. We were on the grey list just a few years ago and now placed back on it again. This loop up and down is also destroying Pakistan's economy and also will affect Pakistan's future. So, we really need to invest in something which most people may not care about. They just think, it's corruption, AML. But if it's not changed, our attitudes aren't changed, we will continue to see Pakistan going backwards as opposed to being progressing just like its counterpart, India. So it has made, as this slide shows, and it's more for your own information purposes, there's significant changes that have been introduced since 2020 as regards to AML and CTF matters. So laws have been introduced, individuals, organizations and bodies that were on terrorist group lists from Fatf and the APG have also been placed within Pakistan's own financial sanctions list, which is great to see, but it's a bit too late where you are being given out to and being, highlighted as an uncooperative country, and everybody's pointing their fingers at you, that you really start making changes. But hopefully, once we get through this and that there is no backlisting, Pakistan could and should remain on the grey list. But again, it's no point of having great laws and regulations in place when nobody understands exactly what it means and there's no actual enforcement actions. And if there are any particular enforcement actions, it really isn't as significant. You need to make sure that organizations and individuals are fearful that if they breach these laws and regulations, they have civil and criminal repercussions. And it's only then we can actually see the future of Pakistan benefiting. And when you have counterparties like India and the US all trying to push for Pakistan to be placed on the blacklist, the fact that Germany is now the chair, and from a German standpoint and knowing how Germans operate, they do have little compassion in the sense that you've been given ample opportunities, so Pakistan should have made the final changes that are required. So, we aren't going to be seeing this time around with a sympathetic ear just because China is not there as the chair of Fatf to kind of push for a leniency towards Pakistan. Okay, so what's beyond Fatf? So unless Pakistan can make corrective actions identified, unless there's increased resources, hiring staff, there's no point of hiring staff that aren't trained in this area. I think that's a major problem within Pakistan. We have a lot of very educated Pakistanis, but they may not be focused on the particular area. So having people from a legal, regulatory, compliance background, even a business background or financial background would be a good stepping stone. But these individuals would then need to be trained on local Pakistani laws, customs and regulations. And then they should also have international qualifications to kind of highlight to the international community that, look, we have suitably qualified individuals, both at a domestic and international level. We really need to invest in data protection, information technology laws. That's another matter and beyond the scope of this presentation. And the 2020 data leak has just clearly shown that as an organization, even the state bank, we don't have significant regulations or guidelines in place as regards to data protection, information technology standards. And the problem is that Pakistan may be targeted by not just individuals or groups, but countries like the Israeli intelligence agents who have been known to hack, and there have been studies and reports said that the Israelis are targeting many countries that have placed Israel on the blacklist or the no travel list, and that includes Pakistan. So, we're opening our doors up further and further to being, leaked, to being hacked, and to being manipulated. So, it's great we have all these laws in place, but where are the guidelines coming in? Where is the typologies, recommendations, assistance coming in? That's a big area for our regulatory bodies and our governmental bodies to focus on. And I also think it's something from a risk management from a country level that we need to invest in, and that's in data protection and information technology. So if we fail, ultimately, then we will be placed on the blacklist. So in the conclusion, the summary is that our economy is struggling. It'll continue to struggle. The national debt is increasing, which makes it further difficult for Pakistan's future in terms of the young generations having some sort of stability being made available for them. The opportunities are going to therefore reduce. It's going to therefore have a very young population that may be jobless, may be unemployed, which could result in further AML, CTF risks, because these individuals may become disgruntled despite being highly educated and skilled. They may not have the jobs available for them. So as a country, this will only lead to further negative problems, further negative repercussions. Think about what's happened in Iran. Think about what happened in North Korea. These countries, while being, even Afghanistan, they were wealthy countries. Venezuela was a wealthy country, but as the AML and CTF levels increased, the international community withdrew from them, and so the national levels of debt exposed were heightened. Then it led to struggle, young disgruntled individuals, and they're all unhappy because their futures have been taken away from them. And for us to better Pakistan, to better its reputation and give Pakistan a survival and a good survival chance, it's not just good for us to just being getting by. There needs to be opportunities, and that comes from having good, stable laws, regulatory body enforcement actions. It doesn't need to be perfect, just good solid measures that at least we can show and demonstrate how Pakistan is actually a stable country from a financial perspective in order to attract foreign direct investments and also to really entice overseas Pakistanis to come back and assist, because these individuals have knowledge and they've been exposed to various different countries, being exposed to how countries are run, managed, and they can use this expertise and bring it back and help Pakistan for its long-term future. So we need to make sure we get off the grey list, and otherwise we have countries like India rooting for Pakistan to go backwards, and it is hoping it will become backlist, and it's actively campaigning. If you do a quick Google search, many of the discussions on Pakistan's AML, grey list and backlist, it's actually coming from a lot of Indian newspapers or Indian news channels or sources. And it's a clear campaign by India in order to heighten the negative viewpoint of Pakistan in the eyes of the international community. So that's my presentation, and hopefully you found it useful.
Thank you, Sana. Thank you very much. Okay, now we have Dr. Ikramul. He'll be presenting on trade-based money laundering.
Hello, thank you very much, Fahad, Zafar. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Saab, we can hear you. Please go on.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me on this very important topic that Pakistan is caught for the last 2 years, and we are pondering how to come out of it. And I will just concentrate today on which is not being touched, and which perhaps most neglected, but a lot of money laundering is taking place. And with that country, China, we have always a difference of $4 billion a year in what and export they are showing. So how they are setting the balance amount is really kind of that with the country agreement, and you cannot reconcile figures with them for the last 10 years, and started when a case was taken up by the Supreme Court through during the very bad law and order situation. There's just that I want to give that in this particular area, little is written from the side of Pakistan for research there. There is no preventive measures, and I am afraid that even Financial Action Task Force Group has taken, although little note of that. I have seen 2 or 3 their case studies, but not in depth. So I will just now tell you that my presentation will have introduction, then money laundering and financing, understanding trade-based money laundering, what is the regulatory framework, challenges and best practices, and case studies. So these will be the broad things I am going to discuss and to present. So the first thing, as we all know, is that money laundering is generally defined in terms of engaging in acts designed to conceal or disguise through origins or criminally derived proceeds, so that unlawful proceeds appear to have been derived from legitimate origins or constitute legitimate assets. The different methodologies like placement, where to cash generated from criminal activities is converted into monetary instruments such as money orders, travel, checks, cashier checks, or deposited into accounts at financial institutions. And layering, we all know, involves separating the illegally obtained money from its criminal source by layering through a series of financial transactions, which makes it difficult to trace the money back to its original source. And integration is then the last stage where funds are reintroduced into the economy and used to purchase and fund legitimate activities. Integration includes the purchase of luxury goods, businesses, real estate, etc. Today we have published a specific article focusing on real estate, because in Pakistan real estate is a big business, and they're giving amnesties, while at the same time in February we have to again appear and tell them, but twice real estate sector has been given a amnesty, and now it has been renewed for another year. So what will be the impact of this, we are going to discuss in a few minutes time. So there are mainly two forms of money laundering which criminal organization, financier of terrorism, launder their funds to loot legitimate financial system. One is cash-based money laundering methods, financial system, digital movements, and trade money laundering methods, physical movements of funds through the trade system. So, what's the difference between organized crime and terrorist groups? There is comparison has been made that one is motivated by profit and greed, the other by ideology, and organized crime seeks economic ends, the other one seeks political ends. The organized one is engaged in corruption, and they are also engaged in corruption, where they and have structures that work as cell-based structures in both the cases. As far as the requirement of savings, that's what are using to recruit new members is also a common feature. List of this one, and group identity is important, but when we come to generic taggers which pose threat, one is symbolic and the other is generic one. And of course, organized crime have to avoid their attention and keep them anonymous. But the other one, which is terrorist group, they seek public attention because their agenda is to impose their kind of ideology on others. And money laundering tools are common with both of them. So when we talk of terrorist financing, necessarily it is a support of terrorism or of those who encouragement in this form of terrorism. The intent of terrorism is to intimidate people, governments, or international organizations to do or refrain from doing any act through the threat of violence. And terrorist groups need to develop and legitimate as well as unlawful sources of funding that are relatively mobile to ensure that funds can be used to obtain material and other logistic items need to commit terrorists. So illegal sources are on the left-hand side. It's extortion, kidnapping, smuggling, ID theft, narcotics, trafficking, fraud, theft, robbery, tax evasion. And on the right-hand side is legal sources like business ownership, personal employment, charitable or relief funds. The next is like a case study where some goods were purchased from country B as part of ongoing legitimate trade, and then it is being sent to a country C where Israeli custom authority confiscated it, and I have given the source of it by slide. It's a case study, and now we can move to the next one. And here we want to understand what is trade-based money laundering is. So in this part, trade-based money laundering is defined as the process of disguising the proceeds of crime and moving value through the use of trade finance in an attempt to legitimize their illicit origin. This is I have taken from report and it's mentioned here. Process to materialize this can be achieved through misrepresentation of the price, quality, or quantity you can find. And in trade-based funding statistics, share of criminal proceeds in global GDP is around 3.6%, sorry, approximately. Money laundering share in world GDP is 2 to 5, almost 800 billion to 2 trillion approximately. And share of financial sector is 70% to financial sector. Cost of fraud to developing countries is as high as 1,000 billion approximately, and I have taken this from Global Financial Report of 2017. So these figures tell us that where the challenges and what is the volume and the very formidable numbers that we see, and of course it is a world over phenomenon, not only confined to Pakistan. In the next slide, we can see the trade-based laundering will remain profound and significant as per WTO statistical review of 2019, because increase in volume of the global trade in world merchandise noted in 2018 was 3%. Increase in value in US dollar was 10% with total value of $19.7 trillion. Growth noted in fuel and mining products about 23% of several respondents reported the exploitation of fuel and mining products in this trade-based scheme. Growth in world merchandise trade noted about 20%. The inherent risk associated with trade, including but not limited to enormous volume of trade, complexities of global financial system, multiple foreign exchange transactions, and diverse trade financing agreement can possibly create a loophole for lending of legitimate and illicit funds. Sources again I have pointed out at the end of the slide. So, as every country in the world involved in trade, and we all know that international trade is a continuous process. So, trade-based money laundering or trade-based financing of terrorism can therefore occur anywhere. It is a global challenge. A wide range of business sectors can be exploited by criminals to launder the proceeds of crime, which may be high value and low value or low volume. So high volume sectors can be as well, and criminals exploit sectors, products, or business prone to gaps in or consistent application of customer due diligence and know your customer processes across jurisdictions, which can be accelerated by nascent or understanding of trade-based money laundering risks. So, in the next slide, we can see that most significant form of trade also the largest component of financial outflows, about 87%, as measured by Global Financial Integrity, is state misinvoicing. This is utilized not only to launder criminal proceeds, but also to evade taxes and custom duties, strongly claim tax incentives, and or avoid capital control. So, under-invoicing enables the exporter to transfer value to the importer. Trade goods are invoiced or at a low price, below value. Imports then transfer value from the exporters to the payment made for the goods will be lower than the market value of the goods received by the importer. In open invoicing, it is the other way around. It enables the importers to transfer value to exporters. Trade goods are invoiced at a price above the fair market value, and the payments made by the importers will be more than the fair market value of the goods that they receive, thereby transferring the value from the importer to the exporter. And there is multiple invoicing used to justify multiple payments for the same shipment. More than one invoice is submitted for the same international trade transaction. This enables the exporter to receive more volume, more value than the good or worth, with a similar outcome to over invoicing. Then we can see over and under short shipment used to justify under payment the quality of the good received and is overstated or understated. In the same cases, they may be kind of shipments. Then false declarations of trade goods usually used to justify over payments. This quality of type of goods is incorrectly declared and described in order to justify on overstated or understated payment cargoes. So there are many discrepancies between the description of the goods on the bill of lading and on the invoice shipment of goods that appear much larger than exporters or importers' regular business activity. And when goods are shipped through one or more countries' entity for no apparent reasons, then transaction between related parties like commercial or non-commercial terms, then we can see the method of payment appears inconsistent with the risk characteristics of the transaction. The next is the type of goods shipped are deemed high risk for money laundering. Goods are shipped to or from a country designated as high risk for money laundering activities, and after the transaction involves the receipt of cash or other forms of payment from unrelated third party. Now we will have a look at the regulatory framework, laws, rules, and guidance. We have anti-money laundering laws 2010, and we passed the Second Amendment Act in it. Then there was third part as well, not mentioned there, but in September the third amendment this act, that is basically investigation through spying or other methodology, has also been now allowed under anti-money laundering law. The income tax ordinance, some changes have been made to counter these two menaces, State Tax Act and regulations recently in respect of designated non-financial business and professions. FPR circular is issued 924. These rules were badly drafted. I have been studying them for the last 2 weeks, and this column tells that there's not only errors or in language, there's confusion, there's no, for example, definition, there's precious stone and what's jewelry and many other things, but it's very loosely based and conceptually as well, they are very weak. So anti-money laundering and counter financing of terrorism regulation 2018 are already there. As far as Pakistan circular 4, it's a framework, and they have also recently issued a new SRO 950, which is not mentioned here, but I will update it at a later stage. Then what is international regulation and FATF-style regional body and focusing on trade-based money laundering, such as trade-based money laundering known as Financial Action Task Force landmark study published in 2006. Best practices on trade-based money laundering published in 2008. The Pacific Group report published on time-based money laundering, trade-based money laundering published in 2012. Then trade-based money laundering trends developments by the Uzbek Group published in December 2020, is the latest one. And network guidelines on trade-based money laundering are also very important to understand this kind of managed leakage. So, what are the challenges and best practices on this? The main challenges in dealing with trade-based money laundering are alternative remittance system, information trade through informal trade through South Petrol and other items coming, and they are selling in Karachi and up to other cities, traveling so much where you have a lot of points, but this trade is going on till today. Then the use of farm transit trade, you all know that these items booked for Afghanistan, they land in Pakistan. And we have secret Chinese schemes for trade-based money laundering, such as phishing and hook-on. Lack of understanding is coordination with gaps, international cooperation, and prostitution. These are at the moment challenges we are facing as well. Then in this, I have tried to share launching best practices, awareness is training, global trade trend, new risks, and these things are also important to understand that we should have data protection, how database base is created, what is the level of confidentiality, that's data backups and regular updates. These are the best practices. Are we following up? That is a different question, and that is the area where we have to open debate that how much we are compliant and how much we understand best practices to counter trade-based money laundering. In it's some case studies I have taken to mention that how over and under invoicing of goods take place. A company, a foreign exporter, shipped 1 million, it's worth $2 each, but invoice domestic import for 1 million. So the price of one each. Company B pays company A for the goods by sending a wire transfer of 1 million, but sells the open market for 2 million and deposits the extra 1 million, the difference between the invoice price and fair market value, into a bank account to be dispersed according to company's instructions. Alternately, company C, a domestic exporter, ships 1 million chips worth $2 each, but invoice company D a cloud foreign import for 1 million at the price of 3 each. So company D pays company C for the goods by sending a wire transfer of $3 million. Company C then paid 2 million to the supplier and deposits the remaining 1 million between the invoice price and fair market price into the bank account to be dispersed according to the company's G's instruction. Then there is Phantom Puppets. It's also a Brazilian company signed a contract for soybean to a German company. Germany pays the Brazilian company for the shipment, The Brazilian company immediately transferred the funds to a third party that is unrelated to the transaction, and this could have been purchased by the German company that is narrow. In this case, the German company transferred funds to Brazil as an advance payment for the shipment of sterling. Suspicions were raised when it was found that exports of was inconsistent with the Brazilian company's regular business activity, and the size of the reported shipment was inconsistent with the scale of the company's operation. So parallel financial networks is also an area where the alternate remittance system operates. For example, Halala, the United States wants to transfer funds to settle an outstanding account. The US with Pakistan who had to significantly over-invoice the US importer for the purchase of such good. US operator transfer funds to the US importer to cover the extra cost related to over-invoicing. The Pakistani spoke US the over-invoiced amount that the US operator outstanding amount with his Pakistani counterpart. The Pakistani exporter additionally benefited 20% VAT rebate on the higher prices of the imported goods. This is mentioned in the code as well. In this case, rather than simply providing different goods per counterpart, the US operator considers Pakistani to over US importer using the international trade system. US operator was then was able to transfer the funds to settle his account using the transaction to justify payment to the financial system. So using financial system, they involve this kind of trade. Now, if there are any questions and answers, I have my introduction to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ikram. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Now we'll ask Mr. Azizur Rahman. Mr. Azizur Rahman to come in, and let me just set his presentation. Over to you, Mr. Aziz.
Hi, folks. Good wishes to you. Pakistan, all over the world, the banks using the current products have been unable to prevent money launderers and terrorist financiers from using them. This is despite the fact these products are well known for bankers. They have been established for a long time, yet the loopholes have not been filled, and the money launderers continue to use them as and when they can find a loophole in those products. And the aim of this presentation is to discuss how to analyze money laundering and terrorist financing risk and new products being dealt by bankers. If a country evaluations aren't biased, systematic, and carry a lot of weight. According to its most recent mutual evaluation of Pakistan, it viewed the country as falling short in meeting international legal and regulatory standards when it comes to combating money laundering and terrorist financing. Lending in Pakistan's economy, business, and financial sectors being more vulnerable to money laundering and its associated crimes, leading to the reluctance of foreign direct businesses investing in the country. Pakistan is now set to remove all coming in the same CFT program and will soon be an outstanding example of a country fighting AML CTF. Before analyzing the risks of bank products, let's understand briefly the two evils besetting the world: money laundering, terrorist financing. Those we dealt with briefly, as the main concern is the AML CTF risk that bank products have for banks. Money laundering is the process of making money earned from criminal activity appear to have a legitimate source. It's a multi-stage process where the money is accumulated, separated from its original source, mixed with legitimately earned funds, and then funneled back to its original source. Money laundering is essential to the operation of any criminal activity that is long-term and lucrative. Most criminal transactions are handled in cash because only cash payments are sure to be untraceable at the point of sale. However, cash can quickly accumulate to the point that it becomes a liability. For most criminal enterprises, the only alternative to money laundering is to maintain large supplies of physical cash and move it in amounts too small to attract attention. This leaves those involved at constant risk of having physical stockpiles of cash discovered and seized. Even before the days of electronic monitoring, it was difficult to move large sums without attracting attention from law enforcement authorities. In recent years, data analytics and machine learning have made any crime that involves large amounts of money will depend on money laundering to make it possible to spend the proceeds. Research shows that some of the crimes most commonly correlated with money laundering include general fraud, narcotics, trade trafficking, theft and embezzlement, tax and customs violations, and cybercrime. These crimes account for hundreds of billions in losses to countries around the world. The developing world alone is believed to lose close to $1 trillion every year in money that is generated from the criminal activity and then funneled out of the country in laundering schemes. New products and services have offered great opportunities for bankers who enable to connect with their customers and provide value-added services. Choosing the right product or service for the institution and its customers, however, can be easier said than done. Successful management teams and boards of directors typically identify and mitigate risks before considering introducing a new product or service. When risk is not identified and mitigated in advance, the unintended consequences can be costly to resolve. This presentation discusses some factors that management and the board should take into consideration before introducing a new product or service. Banks that successfully identify and roll out new products and services typically have a documented, repeatable, and auditable process to guide their decision making. In practice, this often means that the board approves and the management team follows comprehensive new product policies and procedures, documents decisions sufficiently, and ensure that all relevant functions within the organization appropriately engage with one another. Management the board should assess the sufficiency of their new product policies and procedures. They should consider whether those policies require management and staff for various functions, including compliance, accounting, risk, internal audit, and line management, to vet, review, and recommend new products and services for senior management or board approval. Cover the investigative stages of new products and services as well as the approval and deployment stages. Require that operating policies and procedures are updated to provide clear guidance to staff on how to comply with all legal, regulatory requirements associated with the new product to avoid violations of law and undue exposure to legal liability prior to product introduction. Address and mitigate risks through the product life cycle, including pricing, marketing, distribution, accounting. When banks enter new business lines, such as offering trust or wealth management services, expand the new delivery channel, such as the internet or mobile banking, or expand into new markets for new loan or deposit products, such as rewards, credit cards, or consumer remote deposit capture. And going beyond the boundaries of the institution's existing business model, management teams should first think of new products and services in the context of the institution's strategic direction. Questions that management and the board would typically consider in this initial step of the process could include the following. How did we learn about this product? Did a current vendor suggest the product to the company from our existing product? Did a new vendor cold call on management? Are our competitors or peers in other markets offering the products? Have our customers asked for the product? Is this an established product or service, or is it bleeding edge, an extremely new or innovative product or service with higher uncertainty as to consumer acceptance, or leading edge, a proven product or service that's still new enough that it may be difficult to implement or support and where customer acceptance is still building. If it is a bleeding edge or leading edge, how quickly is the product or service likely to evolve? What will be the cost of keeping pace with the evolution? What is the likelihood that our customers will value the product? Do our personnel have the skills and capacity to deliver the product and service effectively? If we retain our current employees and or hire people with those skills, will we also have to change our compensation practices for consistency with other banks offering the product? Will we be changing the culture of the company? Will this product or service complement, cannibalize our existing products and services? Will it enable us to attract and retain new customers? Where do we see ourselves as an organization in 3, 5, or 10 years if we do or don't offer this product? Do our existing customers have a need for this product or service? Or are there less expensive products that would better serve our customers' needs? Are features, risks, and terms of the product explained clearly and conspicuously, or are they buried in a lengthy document full of legalese that makes it difficult for the consumer to make a truly informed choice? Are fees or penalties structured in such a way that unsuspecting, unsophisticated, or vulnerable consumers would experience financial difficulties for which it would be difficult to execute themselves? Are there financial incentives for bank employees to offer this product or products that may also be suitable for the consumer? If a potential product or service appears to be a good strategic fit with the organization and its customers, only then do management teams delve into the more tactical aspects of the decision. It is often tempting to focus disproportionately on the benefits of a new product or service, less on the potential risks. That is why it will be helpful to first consider the risks of a product before selling oneself to the benefits. Management teams should consider the costs and risks of a new product or service very broadly, looking at all risk dimensions across the organization. While a new product or service may appear to fit into a particular risk niche, a loan product may primarily affect the credit risk, whereas a new delivery channel may primarily affect operational risk. The interconnections of all aspects of a bank cannot be ignored. Oh. Mobile or internet banking cannot only create a variety of operational risks, but also lead to increased liquidity risks. For example, funds can move at the click of a button. Compliance risk, for example, inconsistent and incomplete disclosures, and reputational risk, for example, negative publicity from a data breach, among a host of other less obvious risks. New home lending products may allow consumers to lock in part of their variable rate line of credit at a fixed rate, but can also lead to increased sensitivity of credit risk. For example, the consumer is locked into a higher payment even if the rates fall. Operational risk. For example, systems cannot account for the dual product and compliance risk. For example, if disclosures are incomplete or inconsistent with actual practice. Risk-related questions. Will this product or service increase, decrease, or leave unchanged aggregate or specific risk? If it increases risk in one or more risk dimensions, is the new level within our already established risk tolerance? What steps can we take to mitigate risks to an acceptable level? Are there industry best practices we can consider? Will the new product or service cause changes to our financial position, including the calculation of regulatory capital ratios? Do we have or can we acquire the staff expertise to adequately manage and control the risk in the new product or service, as well as the risk in our established portfolios of products and services? Then comes the regulatory compliance. Banks operate in a highly regulated industry, and successful management assess whether new products or service fully comply with the applicable laws and regulations. The scope of permissible products and services may be limited by the State Bank of Pakistan. Management team should discuss new products and services proposal with the regulators to determine whether an application or notice may be required. Has the product or service been reviewed for compliance with applicable SBP guidelines? Has the product been reviewed from a consumer fairness standpoint? Will an application or notice need to be filed with the state bank? And if so, do we have the necessary information to submit with the application? How will that affect our lead time? Will the new product or service affect our aim and risk profile? Will we use third-party vendors for any aspect of the new product or service? If so, do we have a sufficiently robust vendor management and oversight process to ensure that the vendor complies with all applicable laws and regulations? A financial analysis of proposed products and services should be made, re-examine financial assumptions underpinning the new product analysis, considering scenarios where customers' adoption and sales are less than expected or certain key costs are higher than expected. Sometimes even seemingly minor variances in the key assumptions can significantly affect the profitability. It's also important to document the analysis and provide a record for back testing. Thank you for the patience.
Thank you, Rahman. We have a question, Mr. Farzand. He probably wants to ask some question. Mr. Farzand, can you hear me? Please go on, if you could.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please ask your question. What's your question?
Yeah. Thank you for the wonderful session. My question to your respectable panel is, what are Pakistan's chances in the upcoming FATF meeting from moving from grey to white list? I mean, they must have seen the government's recent interventions and the compliance report which they have submitted to FATF. So what are our chances from moving from grey to white? Or are we going to stay in the grey list, or are we going to move? Because the chances for us moving from grey to black are there's no chance Pakistan can move to blacklist, because nobody can afford that. Not just Pakistan, but all the international community. But from moving from grey to white, what are our chances?
I think we are pretty optimistic here. We'll be moving out from the grey list. I'm sure about it. The last session last week we had Shabar Zaidi here, and he was of the opinion that probably by December this year we'll be out of grey list. But for me, I think it'll be real quick in the next session. Session, I think it'll be really quick. But let me just bring in my other colleagues. Sana, would you like to answer this? Sana, you around? Okay. Mr. Aziz, would you like to answer?
No, that's all right.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's more like it, Farzan.
You can only go back into the whitelist if you have complied with each and every requirement of the FATF. That means crossing each T and dotting each I. Without that, you will not get out.
Okay.
Okay, so we'd like to end by thanking our panelists, as Dr. Ikram, Mr. Azizur Rahman, Sana, for taking time out of their busy schedules to let us know more about money laundering and FATF restrictions. We hope Pakistan gets out of the FATF grey list real soon. And thank you very much. Thank you to the listeners as well. Thank you. Bye bye.